Francis Ngannou is now the heavyweight champion of the world, putting Stipe Miocic's lights out in round number 2. An absolute vicious KO, like they all are with him. I don't think there's a such thing as a ticky-tack knockout when it comes to Francis Ngannou. But it was vicious, man. It was scary. It was like all of them are scary. And I don't know if anything's ever going to top what he did to Alistair Overeem, because that's like Mortal Kombat video game stuff. But, the thing that he does, he's done this now to a couple guys. He's done this to Cain Velasquez and now to Stipe, where he's hit him and basically bent back the knee. I don't even know. Maybe Stipe has some leg injury from that. But that was crazy. That was absolutely nuts. He hit him with the short left hand after Stipe started coming towards him, and went down immediately. And Francis Ngannou, he hit him with one extra one that was just absolutely hellacious. It was an absolute death knell to Stipe's heavyweight reign. And look, dead wrong on this show. I thought that Stipe was going to come out of this on top, that he had the more well-rounded game, and really that we hadn't, like many people thought, I didn't know what we were going to get from Francis, because as great as his run was back to the title, and it was very earned. It was a hard road back to get to the championship, just simply because you had the trilogy with Stipe. This guy went out there and obliterated everybody that they threw in front of him out after the Derek Lewis fight. And just very impressive that you see him make it that way and do it the hard way. And we saw a more well-rounded guy. We saw a guy who not only was more patient, looked in better shape, better poise, and more well-rounded. We saw a diversified amount of strikes. All of that stuff. Didn't get bothered the first time he wasn't able to put Stipe's lights out, even though he hit him with a big shot. All of this stuff was just great maturity from Francis Ngannou, and I think has everybody thinking that not only did he just become heavyweight champion of the world, but that this is going to be a hell of a reign. Like, this is going to be a hell of a long reign. But then, of course, the immediate aftermath, the thought of it is, can we get him and John Jones in the octagon together? Can we make that super fight happen? Because there's not many fights that you look upon and say, all right, that's going to be bigger than a Conor McGregor fight. That's going to do a gazillion buys. That's going to have everybody buzzing. That's going to have mainstream. But like, the UFC doesn't have a ton of those. They've tried it before. Like they've done, especially at the heavyweight division, like Stipe DC the first time around. We're like, oh, that's a legit super fight. You have the reigning light heavyweight champion of the world coming up, and he's fighting Stipe, and that's a huge fight. Like, let's go. Let's make it happen. And then you thought that's a legitimate super fight. But not, it did good, but it just didn't click like that. It didn't. And none of the fights in the trilogy did. They really didn't. They were good fights. People liked them. I liked them. I enjoyed it. Fun matchups, but nobody really looked upon it as a super major fight, which, to be honest with you, with Stipe has kind of been tough, even though he is the greatest heavyweight of all time. Not the most, for whatever reason, just not the most, I guess just not a guy that people just tune in to see like crazy. I think he has a solid fan base. I think he has everybody's respect, but just never kind of crossed over to that mainstream for being the greatest heavyweight champion of all time, which tonight doesn't change. These guys are 1-1. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of arguments. Look, there's a lot of people that do have arguments tonight of who should get that title shot again. Stipe certainly does, because him and Francis are 1-1. He is the most decorated heavyweight champion of all time. I don't know what tonight's business did. I don't know how many people ended up buying the pay-per-view, so that could dictate some things. Derek Lewis has a hell of an argument that he has a win over Francis Ngannou and is riding a 3-fight win streak and looked really good in his recent fights. And they both, I think, when you're talking about a guy who is the reigning champ losing his belt, he already has a win. They're even in a series. Definitely can go to that fight. Francis versus Derek Lewis. Not a great first fight. Very, very weird. It was after the Stipe loss. We were all really excited about it. And just neither one of those guys would pull the trigger. And it was kind of like Derek Lewis lost by default because he pushed forth a little bit more to get the action to where it was. But look, when you have the greatest fighter of all time finally do something the fans have been wanting him to do basically since the time he was 25 years old. We've all been wondering, what would a heavyweight John Bones Jones look like at heavyweight? He's bigger, he's taller than Francis, he's got a longer reach than Francis. Obviously, he doesn't have the knockout power that Francis does. Nobody does. But he is looked upon as the greatest mixed martial arts to ever walk the earth. He's the GOAT in my eyes. And if you have that fight as potentially on the table, you make that fight happen. And you throw some arguments out the window just to make the fight that everybody wants to see happen. It just has to. That's what's got to happen. And yeah, that could be a little bit unfair to Stipe. Stipe's just recently had a trilogy. They have built this division around him for a long, long time, and for some reason he always seems to for unfortunate luck, he has been screwed out of some potential bigger fights than Daniel Cormier, like the Brock Lesnar thing where he was supposed to fight Brock Lesnar. He ends up losing to DC. They switched to DC Brock Lesnar. There was a whole back and forth of that. Never happened. I'm sure he thought he was going to get to this and he was going to be the guy that would have fought John Jones. And look, there's not really much of an argument otherwise other than Derek Lewis. Stipe would have gotten to fight who he wants to fight. He's the champion. But there's a couple things. First of all, I don't think Stipe should fight for a while. I think he's not been the most active guy in the world anyway when he was champion. But you take a knockout like that from Francis, I do think that you should, put it on ice for a little bit because I thought he's taken a lot from the first time they fought. Just doesn't talk the same and has been in a lot of big time wars, knocked out by DC. The second fight was a good back and forth affair. The third fight was a brutal fight. And then this fight, could have, if he wasn't such an absolute assassin, could have been put out in the first round. He kept going and then, was able to withstand the hurricane and then get into the second round, comes fourth and just runs into an absolute atomic bomb. So I wouldn't exactly call this fight competitive, much like you wouldn't call the first fight competitive. This seemed like a pretty one-sided affair in Francis's direction, much like the first fight was for Stipe. But there's so, every once in a while, the unfair thing kind of gets thrown in there for what the fans want to see. And the UFC can't botch this, man. Can't be botched. You got this fight on a silver platter. I know that, John Jones and the UFC have had their standoffs. Dana and John Jones have had their standoffs that kind of led to why John's been so inactive lately. The only thing that would stop me if I'm John is there's a couple of things. The only thing that would stop me if I'm John is not necessarily Francis. It's just having the feeling of fighting at heavyweight. And do you want somebody first? That comes with some risk. And then if they go the other direction, it seems like it would be you would do the Stipe versus Francis trilogy. And then what if Francis loses? I think if you're John, you're coming up for this big payday. Him versus Francis Ngannou right now, I feel like is in the aftermath of this, the way the world is talking about it, everybody wants to see this. It feels like it is the biggest money opportunity of John Jones's career. And that's what he's wanted. He's wanted to be paid like heavyweight boxers. He wanted to be paid like the Conor McGregors. He's wanted to be paid like the big combat stars, which he hasn't necessarily been the draw to without having that perfect running mate. Him and DC have done some monster events. this, to me, is definitely got the potential to be the biggest fight of his career, for sure. And so while it's not ideal because you're going to be in this position of going right up to fight the scariest guy at heavyweight, you do have a lot more mixed martial arts experience than he does. You seemingly are the most well-rounded guy that's walked in that octagon outside of, next to maybe GSP. And, while you don't have necessarily the knowledge of the size, I'm sure you've tangled with heavyweights and sparring before, plenty. And so I think that would be, maybe it's not enough of a deterrent to let this nuclear hot fight take place. And let me just say, as a greedy South Floridian, I admit this, been a greedy pig with these fights down here. All right. They're happening willy-nilly left and right. I can't, Canelo's down here. We got Andre coming down here. But we have yet to have the UFC down here. Now, the UFC's going to Jacksonville. All right. They're going to do this little test run, see what the fans are like. Hoping to be there. All right. And that's great. But it's not a stadium. I feel like this is a stadium-worthy fight. John Jones versus Francis Ngannou, heavyweight championship of the world. Just did a big event. Canelo Alvarez at Hard Rock Stadium. Wasn't sold out. Still did socially distance. I don't know what Miami's comfort level is right now, but let's be honest. We've had basically spring break going on 4 months down here. So if people get to shake their asses amongst a crowd, I like to see some people throw some fists, to be honest with you. And so I don't know who I got to talk to. I don't know if it's Tom Garfinkel, Dana White, whose palms I got to grease, whose shoulders I got to rub, all right, whose hands I got to shake, what babies do I got to kiss. But Francis Ngannou, John Bones Jones, for the heavyweight championship of the world at Hard Rock Stadium. Let's go. If it's not going to be there, to be honest with you, if it's not going to be at Hard Rock, which I don't know if it will be, because they haven't done capacity crowds there yet, they are doing Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders at Jerry's World. I feel like in the words of Coach Quinn, big. No, big. It needs to be big. Like this is, I'm telling you, you can just feel, sometimes these things in the fight game, they're not that hard. And you can just feel the buzz immediately. And everybody wants that fight. So not only do you do it as soon as possible. Friend said he'd do it in the summer. Good. Let's do it. What else you got? All right. Kamaru and Jorge are going to fight. You got 3 title fights that are happening in 4 weeks. Okay. They're out. You got who else would you do? Jorge's the biggest thing you got in the welterweight division as far as star power is concerned. So that's not International Fight Week. I guess you got Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, which incorrectly isn't happening for the championship. But who knows when they're going to do that. But as far as big-time championship, and honestly, I really think this is the potential to be like, if you told me on a given night you had the chance to watch Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier, or you had a chance to watch John Jones versus Francis Ngannou, I think for the first time, you could really say in Conor McGregor's career, he'd be outdrawn. Like if for whatever reason, let's just say Conor had his own little McGregor Entertainment promote, and he got to put on the Dustin Poirier fight. I think for the first time, he'd get outdrawn if these two fights. So, in my mind, the tie goes to the heavyweights. Tie goes to the big boys. They got to make it happen. I hope it is. I know that there's definitely some concern with the money thing. John said, because Dana said after that, John would want to go to 185 after watching that. Look, I don't know why you do that. All right, Dana White, he's a great promoter. I don't want to say that he's not a great promoter. I would just be saying false things if I said he wasn't a good promoter. But he does say some things sometimes that I just don't get. And how you wouldn't be immediately like flocking to getting these two in an octagon together. You got the Fertittas there. They're watching. Everybody's watching. That's going to go viral like crazy. Everyone's going to be watching this. How you don't, immediately start pumping that up immediately. You don't say Jon Jones run to 185. You say, hey, that's the greatest fighter that's ever graced the octagon, which you said before. You pump that up against, that's the scariest guy that's ever graced the octagon. Let's see what happens when those two forces collide. And this is kind of, the funny thing is with Jon, this is really like the last stand as far as like what we've always, the only thing that comes close to this is the disappointment of never getting to see him fight Rumble, because we saw Jon take out every contender up and down the rankings forever at light heavyweight. I guess outside, people you want to be technical about it. You'll have the snob MMA fan be like, I lost to Dominic Reyes, bro, and Thiago Santos was kind of dicey. All right, good for you. The guy's been champion since he was 21, but fine. The point is, Jon Jones he's still gotten his hand raised after every one of those affairs, and the thing we've always wanted to see him though against is like that drop dead knockout puncher. If he makes a mistake, what'll happen? And this guy, Francis Ngannou, Jon's trying to balloon up to whatever weight he's going to settle out of heavyweight. I think he said 245 was the last time I think he checked in. Francis like cuts to get to the 165 limit. He's huge. Stipe tried to take him down tonight. Did a great job sprawling. I don't know what, the advice that he's getting from his coaches is tenfold from whatever he was getting the last time. I'm sure having Kamaru Usman is a big help there as well. He looked fantastic with everything. The pace that he fought this fight, the versatility that he brought to this fight, everything. And you just didn't see it in his climb because he hasn't had many bad moments in his career. He has really two bad nights and one where he really got exposed. Because the Derek Lewis fight, it's not like he got exposed. It just, you can clearly see, and he's admitted that he was mentally a little bit shook from what had happened in the Stipe fight. But it's Stipe Miocic. Like, it's the bright lights are on you in a championship fight for the first time, and it didn't go your way. But his climb back, steamrolling through Blades again, Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez, and Jairzinho Rozenstruik, scary as hell, diced through him. And then today we got to see what he's really been working on the whole time. While those fights were just little, like little fight hors d'oeuvres, pigs in a blanket. And then today was the main course. We saw some Francis Ngannou souffle, and it was delicious. Oh, good. But you want to talk about prime rib night? Woo! Oh, primo meat. Oh, tomahawk steak. Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou. Hard Rock Stadium, please, Garfinkel. Please, Garfinkel, I beg you. Get on the phone with Dana White. Please. Dana White did say, by the way, yesterday, UFC 264. Let's see, that would be, we got 261 coming up in April, 262 in May, 263 in June. So that would be July. He's saying that they're gonna headline that by with Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor 3 at T-Mobile Arena. That's what they're hoping for. So it sounds like they're shifting back to Vegas. Rats. Doesn't matter, Garfinkel. Get out there. Make it happen. All right? Stadium show. I'm telling you. August. Right before football season. Oh, have Tua walk out Francis Ngannou. Oh, it'll be all the rage. I'm telling you. One note that I did miss from Dana White's press conference for last night, he was updated by some of the reporters about Jon Jones's I didn't put on this weight for nothing. And Dana did say, I like it. If that's not serious, then call Hunter right now. We can make that fight. Derek Lewis, we can make that fight tonight. Call Hunter right now. Derek Lewis is the fight to make, but if Jon really wants to fight, listen, one thing to go out and tweet that you want it. I put on this weight, but do you want to fight? I promise you if we call Derek Lewis or one of these other heavyweights, they want to fight. So if Jon really wants to fight, John knows that he can get the fight. Here's the thing, though, that's funny about that. And look, this is why Dana's a smart businessman. The funny thing about that is, if Derek, we know Derek's not the fight to make, though, right? Like, Derek deserves the fight. I'm not saying Derek doesn't deserve to fight Francis Ngannou, but don't say Derek is the fight to make. It's not. The fight to make is quite obviously John Bones Jones versus Francis Ngannou. It's silly to say anything otherwise. But this is very similar to the Masvidal Kamaru Usman situation, and same management, same representation as John Jones. They're going to try and get their guy a heap of money. And what they did was, when George wanted a lot of money, they cheaped out and they went with Gilbert Burns. And it wasn't until Gilbert Burns got COVID that they finally ponied up and paid Jorge. So I really hope that Dana doesn't put himself in this position of, hey, Derek is the fight to make. He's the guy we got waiting in the wings. And then, they screw John Jones in a fight. Now, the thing that makes this a little bit awkward and a little bit different is Derek's also represented by the same people as John. So the other thing is, they were able to go to and maybe Derek will say, I imagine Derek will say yes, he wants a chance at the heavyweight championship. So it may be a lot easier, and I'm sure that his management team wouldn't ruin that opportunity for him if they just get nowhere with John Jones. But it's a little bit more awkward with John not getting the fight, and then they got to go to somebody who else is in their stable, rather than with the Gilbert thing. Gilbert was actually represented by the same people as the champ was. So it's going to be a little bit different, I think, from a negotiating standpoint. But as far as the UFC is concerned, they're trying that same play where they talked up Gilbert a lot after his win over Tyron Woodley to try and make it seem like, oh, he was more deserving, even though the fight everybody wanted to see was Kamaru and Jorge, with them scrapping at Radio Row. And it literally took a disease to make the fight happen. So we'll see. I hope they don't screw that up.